In the annals of criminal history, few names evoke as much fascination and fear as Joaquin Archibaldo Guzman Lara, better known to the world as El Chapo, the Shorty. Standing at merely 5 feet 6 inches tall, this diminutive figure would cast a shadow across 2 continents, becoming one of the most powerful drug lords in history and orchestrating some of the most audacious prison escapes ever recorded. His story is not merely one of crime and punishment, but a complex narrative of ingenuity, corruption, violence, and ultimately, the relentless pursuit of justice across international borders. Born on April 4, 1957, in the rural mountain village of La Tuna in Sinaloa, Mexico, Guzman's early life was marked by poverty and limited opportunities. The rugged terrain of Sinaloa, with its remote valleys and treacherous mountain passes, had long been a haven for those operating outside the law. It was here, among the opium poppy fields and marijuana plantations, that young Joaquin would first encounter the world that would define his destiny. The path to becoming one of the world's most wanted criminals began in the 1980s when Guzman joined the Guadalajara cartel under the tutelage of Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, known as the Godfather of Mexican drug trafficking. When the Guadalajara cartel fragmented in the late 1980s, Guzman seized control of what would become the Sinaloa cartel, transforming it from a regional operation into a global criminal enterprise. Under Guzman's leadership, the Sinaloa cartel pioneered innovative smuggling techniques that revolutionized the drug trade. They constructed elaborate tunnel systems beneath the U.S.-Mexico border, some stretching over a mile long and equipped with ventilation systems, lighting, and even rail tracks for moving drugs. These weren't crude holes in the ground but sophisticated engineering marvels that demonstrated Guzman's ability to think strategically and invest in long-term infrastructure. The cartel's operations extended far beyond simple drug smuggling. They established a network that spanned from the coca fields of Colombia to the streets of Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. Guzman's organization was estimated to be responsible for smuggling between 150 to 300 tons of cocaine and heroin into the United States annually, generating billions of dollars in revenue. His business acumen was evident in the cartel's diversification into methamphetamine production and the cultivation of high-grade marijuana and opium poppies in Mexico's mountainous regions. However, success in the criminal underworld inevitably attracts attention from law enforcement. On June 9, 1993, Guzman's world came crashing down when he was arrested in Guatemala City. The arrest wasn't the result of an elaborate manhunt but rather a stroke of luck for authorities. Guzman had been attending a meeting at a hotel when Guatemalan police, acting on a tip from Mexican authorities, surrounded the building. After a brief chase, the man who had eluded capture for years was finally in custody. The capture sent shockwaves through the drug trafficking world. Here was a figure who had seemed untouchable, whose network of corruption and intimidation had kept him free for over a decade. His arrest demonstrated that even the most powerful criminals weren't beyond the reach of law enforcement, though it would soon become apparent that capturing El Chapo was only half the battle. Keeping him in prison would prove to be an entirely different challenge. Following his arrest in Guatemala, Guzman was extradited to Mexico and sentenced to 20 years in prison for drug trafficking, murder, and organized crime charges. He was incarcerated at the Federal Social Readaptation Center No. 1, commonly known as Puente Grande, located in Jalisco, Mexico. This maximum security facility was considered one of Mexico's most secure prisons, designed specifically to hold the country's most dangerous criminals. Puente Grande was built with the latest security technology of its time. The facility featured multiple layers of security, including reinforced concrete walls, electronic surveillance systems, and guard towers positioned at strategic points around the perimeter. Inmates were housed in individual cells, and movement throughout the facility was strictly controlled. For most prisoners, Puente Grande represented the end of their criminal careers, a place where they would serve their sentences in isolation from the outside world. But El Chapo was not most prisoners. Even behind bars, he maintained his connections to the Sinaloa cartel and continued to exert influence over its operations. More troubling for authorities, he began to systematically corrupt the prison staff. Guards, administrators, and even high-ranking officials found themselves on Guzman's payroll. Some were motivated by greed, accepting bribes that far exceeded their modest salaries. Others were coerced through threats against their families. The corruption at Puente Grande was so extensive that it fundamentally altered the nature of Guzman's imprisonment. Instead of serving a harsh sentence, he lived in relative luxury within the prison walls. His cell was furnished with amenities typically reserved for hotel rooms rather than maximum security inmates. He had access to premium food, alcohol, and entertainment. Perhaps most significantly, he was able to receive visits from cartel associates and family members, allowing him to continue directing criminal operations from his cell. Prison records, which would later be examined during investigations, revealed the shocking extent of the corruption. Guards were paid hundreds of dollars per month, substantial sums in Mexico, to look the other way or provide special services. Some guards became so compromised that they essentially worked for Guzman rather than the Mexican government. This network of corruption extended beyond individual guards to include administrative staff, medical personnel, and security supervisors. The most damning evidence of systemic corruption was the discovery that Guzman had been regularly leaving the prison for extended periods. On multiple occasions, he was secretly transported outside Puente Grande to attend parties, conduct business meetings, and visit family members. These excursions were elaborate operations that required the cooperation of numerous prison officials and represented a complete breakdown of security protocols. By 2001, Guzman had been imprisoned for 8 years, but his influence and resources had only grown during his incarceration. The corrupt network he had established at Puente Grande had evolved into a sophisticated operation that effectively gave him control over significant portions of the prison. However, Guzman was not content with his comfortable imprisonment, he wanted complete freedom. The plan for his escape was audacious in its simplicity and stunning in its execution. On the evening of January 19, 2001, Guzman was scheduled to meet with his lawyer in one of the prison's consultation rooms. This meeting was routine. Such visits had occurred regularly throughout his imprisonment and rarely attracted special attention from guards who had become accustomed to Guzman's privileged treatment. What happened next would become one of the most infamous prison escapes in modern history. According to the official investigation that followed, Guzman was somehow smuggled out of the prison hidden in a laundry cart. The details of how exactly this occurred remain disputed, with various versions of events emerging over the years. Some accounts suggest he was hidden beneath dirty linens and wheeled out by corrupted guards. Others claim he walked out disguised as a maintenance worker or visitor. The most widely accepted version of events suggests that Guzman's escape was facilitated by Francisco El Chito Camberos Rivera, a prison guard who had been on Guzman's payroll for years. Camberos Rivera allegedly helped Guzman hide in a large laundry cart, which was then wheeled through multiple security checkpoints without inspection. The cart was loaded onto a truck that regularly collected laundry from the prison and transported to an off-site facility for washing. The escape wasn't discovered until the following morning during routine headcount. When guards arrived at Guzman's cell for the standard 6 a.m. count, they found it empty. The bed had been arranged to suggest someone was sleeping in it, but upon closer inspection, it became clear that Mexico's most notorious drug lord had vanished. The discovery triggered immediate lockdown procedures at Puente Grande. All inmates were confined to their cells while guards conducted a thorough search of the facility. Security cameras were reviewed, and staff members were questioned about their activities during the previous 24 hours. Despite these efforts, it quickly became apparent that Guzman had not simply hidden somewhere within the prison, he was gone. The escape caused a political earthquake in Mexico. President Vicente Fox, who had taken office just weeks earlier, faced his first major crisis as questions arose about the competence and integrity of the country's justice system. How could the nation's most secure prison have failed so completely? The incident exposed not just individual corruption but systemic failures that undermined public confidence in Mexico's ability to combat organized crime. Following his escape from Puente Grande, Guzman vanished into the rugged mountains of Sinaloa, a region he knew intimately from his childhood and early criminal career. The area's geography provided natural advantages for someone seeking to avoid capture. Remote valleys, hidden caves, and treacherous mountain passes created a landscape where a fugitive could disappear completely, especially one with extensive local connections and virtually unlimited financial resources. The manhunt for El Chapo became one of the most intensive criminal investigations in Mexican history. The Mexican government, under pressure from both domestic critics and the United States, dedicated enormous resources to his recapture. Special task forces were created, combining elements from various law enforcement agencies including the federal police, military, and intelligence services. The United States Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, provided assistance, sharing intelligence and offering technical support. Despite these efforts, Guzman seemed to stay one step ahead of his pursuers. His evasion techniques were sophisticated and demonstrated a deep understanding of law enforcement tactics. He employed multiple body doubles, maintained numerous safe houses across Mexico, and used advanced communication systems to coordinate his activities while avoiding detection. Perhaps most importantly, he continued to rely on corruption as a defensive strategy, maintaining networks of informants within law enforcement agencies who could provide advance warning of planned operations. During his years as a fugitive, the Sinaloa cartel not only survived but thrived under Guzman's continued leadership. The organization expanded its operations, establishing new smuggling routes and entering into strategic partnerships with other criminal groups. By some estimates, the cartel controlled up to 40% of the drug trade between Mexico and the United States, generating annual revenues measured in billions of dollars. Guzman's status as a fugitive paradoxically enhanced his reputation within certain segments of Mexican society. In his home state of Sinaloa, he was viewed by some as a folk hero, a poor boy who had risen to challenge the established order and redistribute wealth to impoverished communities. This romanticized image was carefully cultivated through strategic acts of charity and community investment, creating a base of popular support that further complicated law enforcement efforts. The search for El Chapo became increasingly frustrated as years passed without significant progress. Multiple operations came tantalizingly close to success only to fail at the last moment. In some cases, raids on suspected safe houses found evidence that Guzman had been present just hours before authorities arrived. These near misses fueled speculation about continued corruption and raised questions about whether he would ever be captured. The breakthrough in the hunt for El Chapo came not from traditional law enforcement methods but from advances in technology and intelligence gathering. By 2012, both Mexican and American authorities had developed sophisticated surveillance capabilities that made it increasingly difficult for even the most resourceful criminals to remain hidden indefinitely. The key development was the ability to intercept and analyze communications used by the Sinaloa cartel. Despite Guzman's efforts to maintain operational security, the vast scale of his organization's activities required constant communication between different levels of the network. Advanced monitoring systems, operated jointly by Mexican and American intelligence agencies, began to identify patterns in these communications that could be used to track the cartel's leadership. The investigation focused particularly on Guzman's inner circle, including family members, trusted associates, and personal staff. By monitoring their movements and communications, investigators hoped to identify patterns that might reveal Guzman's location. This approach required patience and sophisticated analysis, but it gradually began to yield results. A crucial breakthrough came through the monitoring of communications related to Guzman's personal life. Despite his status as a fugitive, he maintained relationships with multiple women and remained actively involved in the lives of his children. These personal connections, while providing emotional support during his years underground, also created vulnerabilities that skilled investigators could exploit. The intelligence-gathering effort was complicated by Guzman's security measures. He employed multiple communication systems, frequently changed phones and encryption methods, and used intermediaries to create layers of separation between himself and potentially monitored communications. However, the sheer volume of coordination required to run a global criminal enterprise meant that perfect operational security was virtually impossible to maintain over extended periods. By early 2014, the intelligence gathered by Mexican and American authorities had narrowed the search for El Chapo to the resort city of Mazatlan, Sinaloa. The investigation had identified a network of safe houses and support personnel operating in the area, suggesting that Guzman was using the city as a base of operations. Mazatlan offered several advantages for a fugitive of his stature. It was located in his home state where he had extensive connections, it was a busy tourist destination where strangers wouldn't attract attention, and its coastal location provided potential escape routes by sea. The final phase of the operation began when surveillance teams identified suspicious activities at a luxury condominium complex in Mazatlan. Intelligence indicated that the apartment was being used by someone requiring extensive security measures and enjoying the kind of privileged treatment typically associated with high-level cartel leaders. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling enough to justify a major operation. Mexican authorities, working closely with American intelligence agencies, developed a comprehensive plan for capturing Guzman. The operation required careful coordination to prevent him from escaping once again. Based on previous failed attempts, investigators knew that Guzman had sophisticated early warning systems and could disappear quickly if he detected law enforcement activity in his vicinity. On the morning of February 22, 2014, Mexican Marines launched simultaneous raids on multiple locations in Mazatlan. The primary target was the condominium where intelligence suggested Guzman was staying. The operation was designed to be swift and overwhelming, preventing any opportunity for escape or resistance. The raid on the main target location initially appeared to be another near miss. When Marines breached the apartment, they found evidence of recent occupation but no sign of Guzman himself. However, rather than fleeing the immediate area, he had moved to a nearby hotel, apparently believing it would be safer than remaining in the compromised safe house. The breakthrough came when Marines, continuing their sweep of the area, identified suspicious activity at the Hotel Miramar. Intelligence indicated that someone matching Guzman's description had checked in under a false name and was staying in one of the hotel's premium suites. This information led to a second phase of the operation, focusing on the hotel. At approximately 6:40 a.m., Mexican Marines surrounded the Hotel Miramar and began systematically searching the building. When they reached the suite identified by intelligence, they found Joaquin Guzman Lora, along with his wife Emma Coronel Ispuro and twin daughters. The world's most wanted drug lord was arrested without resistance, ending his 13-year run as a fugitive. The capture was a triumph for Mexican law enforcement and represented a significant victory in the ongoing struggle against organized crime. Pictures of Guzman in custody, looking disheveled and much older than during his previous incarceration, were transmitted around the world. The man who had seemed almost mythical in his ability to evade capture was revealed to be simply human after all. Following his capture in Mazatlan, Guzman was immediately transferred to the Altiplano Federal Penitentiary, located in the state of Mexico about 90 kilometers west of Mexico City. This facility, officially known as the Federal Social Readaptation Center No. 1, was considered Mexico's most secure prison and had been specifically chosen to prevent another escape. Altiplano represented a significant upgrade in security compared to Puente Grande. The facility had been designed with the lessons learned from Guzman's previous escape in mind. It featured state-of-the-art surveillance systems, including cameras capable of monitoring every inch of the facility 24 hours a day. Guard procedures were more rigorous, with multiple layers of oversight designed to prevent the kind of systematic corruption that had enabled the 2001 escape. Guzman's cell at Altiplano was designed to be escape-proof. Located in the maximum security section of the prison, it measured approximately 3 by 4 meters and contained only basic furnishings, a concrete bed, a small table, a toilet, and a sink. The cell had no windows to the outside world, and the only natural light came from a small skylight in the ceiling. Unlike his previous imprisonment, there were no luxuries, no special privileges, and no unauthorized visitors. The security measures extended beyond physical constraints. Guzman's communications were strictly monitored, with all conversations recorded and analyzed by intelligence personnel. His movements within the prison were tracked and documented, and he was under constant surveillance during any time spent outside his cell. The goal was to create an environment where escape would be virtually impossible and where he could not continue directing cartel operations from prison. Despite these precautions, Mexican authorities remained nervous about their ability to hold such a high-profile prisoner. Guzman's previous escape had demonstrated the extent of his resources and the sophisticated nature of his support networks. Intelligence reports suggested that the Sinaloa cartel remained loyal to its imprisoned leader and might attempt to facilitate another escape. These concerns were heightened by the political implications of holding Guzman. The Mexican government faced significant pressure from the United States to prevent another escape, with American officials making it clear that any failure to maintain custody would have serious diplomatic consequences. At the same time, domestic critics watched closely for any signs that the same corruption and incompetence that had enabled the 2001 escape might resurface. Unknown to the authorities at Altiplano, even as they were implementing unprecedented security measures above ground, one of the most audacious prison escapes in history was already being planned below their feet. The second escape of El Chapo would not rely on corrupted guards or administrative failures, but on engineering skills that would have impressed legitimate construction companies. The tunnel that would enable Guzman's escape began construction almost immediately after his incarceration at Altiplano. The project required extensive planning, substantial financial resources, and sophisticated technical expertise. The tunnel's starting point was a house located approximately 1.5 kilometers from the prison, carefully selected to avoid detection while providing access to the prison grounds. The engineering challenges were immense. The tunnel needed to be deep enough to avoid detection by ground-penetrating radar and other surveillance equipment used by prison authorities. It had to be structurally sound enough to prevent collapse during construction and use. Most critically, it needed to terminate precisely at Guzman's cell, requiring surveying accuracy that would challenge professional engineers. Construction of the tunnel took over a year and employed dozens of workers operating in shifts around the clock. The excavation was done by hand to minimize noise and vibration that might be detected by prison security systems. Soil removed from the tunnel was carefully disposed of at locations far from the construction site to avoid arousing suspicion. The operation required sophisticated logistics to coordinate the movement of equipment, materials, and personnel without attracting attention from law enforcement agencies that were actively searching for any signs of escape planning. The finished tunnel was a marvel of criminal engineering. Stretching 1.5 kilometers in length, it was equipped with lighting, ventilation systems, and even a motorcycle on rails for rapid transportation. The tunnel was tall enough for an adult to walk upright and wide enough to accommodate equipment and supplies. Its construction quality rivaled that of professional mining operations, with reinforced walls and sophisticated drainage systems to prevent flooding. The tunnel's route was carefully planned to avoid underground utilities, foundations of nearby buildings, and areas where construction might be detected. It descended to a depth of approximately 30 feet below ground level and included several turns and elevation changes that demonstrated sophisticated surveying and construction techniques. The precision required to ensure the tunnel emerged exactly at Guzman's cell was extraordinary and suggested the involvement of experienced engineers and surveyors. On the evening of July 11, 2015, just over 17 months after his capture in Mazatlan, Joaquin Guzman was in his cell at Altiplano prison following the standard evening routine. As had become customary, he showered at approximately 8:52 p.m., as recorded by the prison's extensive surveillance system. The cameras captured him entering the shower area attached to his cell, but what happened next would shock Mexican authorities and embarrass the government on an international scale. At 8:52 p.m., Guzman disappeared from view of the surveillance cameras as he entered the shower area. This was not unusual, as the cameras could not monitor the shower itself for privacy reasons. However, when guards checked his cell during the routine 9 p.m. head count, they discovered something that defied belief. Guzman was gone, and in the floor of his shower was a perfectly square hole measuring approximately 50 by 50 centimeters. The hole led to a vertical shaft that descended 10 meters straight down before connecting to the horizontal tunnel that had been under construction for over a year. The shaft's opening in the cell floor had been concealed beneath a removable section that matched the surrounding concrete so precisely that it had gone undetected despite regular inspections. The engineering precision required to create this opening exactly where Guzman could access it from his shower was remarkable. Security cameras throughout the prison were immediately reviewed, but they revealed no signs of external assistance or breach of security protocols. Guzman had simply vanished, apparently through the floor of his supposedly escape-proof cell. The discovery of the tunnel entrance immediately triggered lockdown procedures at Altiplano, but it was already too late. By the time guards discovered his absence, Guzman was likely kilometers away from the prison. The escape route through the tunnel was equipped with everything necessary for a rapid getaway. The motorcycle on rails allowed Guzman to travel the 1.5-kilometer length of the tunnel in just minutes. Emergency breathing equipment was available in case of problems with the ventilation system, and lighting throughout the tunnel ensured safe passage even in darkness. The tunnel emerged in a house that had served as the construction base, where vehicles were waiting to transport the escapee to a secure location. News of the escape spread rapidly, creating an immediate political crisis for the Mexican government. President Enrique Peña Nieto, who had previously boasted about the capture of El Chapo as a major achievement of his administration, now faced intense criticism for allowing the world's most notorious drug lord to escape for a second time. The incident raised serious questions about Mexico's ability to maintain custody of high-profile criminals and undermined confidence in the country's justice system. The second escape of El Chapo represented more than just the loss of a prisoner. It was a profound embarrassment for Mexico on the international stage and a demonstration of the sophisticated capabilities of organized crime networks. The engineering feat accomplished by the tunnel construction challenged assumptions about what criminal organizations could achieve and highlighted the vast resources at their disposal. Within hours of discovering the escape, Mexican authorities launched the most intensive manhunt in the country's history. The operation, codenamed Operation Black Swan, involved thousands of personnel from multiple agencies including the federal police, military, navy, and intelligence services. The manhunt extended across Mexico's entire territory, with particular focus on Sinaloa and other states where Guzman had historical connections. The United States government responded to the escape with a mixture of frustration and determination. American officials had been advocating for Guzman's extradition to the United States even before his escape, arguing that Mexican prisons had proven incapable of holding him securely. The escape validated these concerns and intensified pressure for his immediate extradition if he were recaptured. The Drug Enforcement Administration increased its reward for information leading to Guzman's capture to $5 million, making him one of the most valuable fugitives in the world. American intelligence agencies also provided technical assistance to the Mexican manhunt, including sophisticated surveillance equipment and analysis capabilities that had proven effective in previous operations against cartel leadership. The escape had immediate effects on the dynamics of Mexico's drug trade. Other cartel leaders interpreted Guzman's successful escape as a demonstration of the Sinaloa cartel's continued power and sophistication. Some rival organizations that had begun encroaching on Sinaloa territories during Guzman's imprisonment were forced to reconsider their strategies, knowing that their most dangerous competitor was once again free to direct operations personally. Following his escape from Altiplano, Guzman once again disappeared into the mountains of Sinaloa, but this time the conditions of his fugitive existence were significantly different. The international attention surrounding his second escape meant that law enforcement pressure was more intense than during his previous period underground. Advanced surveillance technologies had improved dramatically since 2001, making it more difficult to remain hidden from the combined intelligence capabilities of Mexican and American agencies. Despite these challenges, Guzman managed to evade capture for 6 months following his escape. During this period, he reportedly moved constantly between different safe houses, rarely staying in one location for more than a few days. His security measures became increasingly sophisticated, involving multiple decoy operations, advanced communication systems, and extensive networks of lookouts and informants. The psychological pressure of constant pursuit began to take its toll on Guzman and his organization. Unlike his previous period as a fugitive, when he had been able to maintain a relatively normal lifestyle while avoiding law enforcement, the intensity of the current manhunt made it difficult to conduct routine business operations or maintain personal relationships. The stress of living under constant threat of capture affected not only Guzman but also his family members and close associates. Intelligence agencies focused their efforts on identifying and monitoring Guzman's communication networks. Advanced surveillance technologies made it possible to intercept and analyze communications even when sophisticated encryption and security measures were employed. The challenge was processing the enormous volume of intercepted communications to identify those actually connected to Guzman's network. A breakthrough came when investigators identified patterns in communications related to Guzman's meetings with associates and family members. Despite the security risks, he apparently could not completely isolate himself from personal relationships, and these contacts created opportunities for law enforcement agencies to track his movements and predict his likely locations. The intelligence breakthrough that led to Guzman's final capture came through monitoring communications related to his interest in having a biographical movie produced about his life. In one of the more surreal aspects of his story, even while living as a fugitive, Guzman was apparently concerned about his public image and wanted to ensure that any film about his life would portray him favorably. These communications, intercepted by joint Mexican-American intelligence operations, led investigators to a network of safe houses in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. The city, located in Guzman's home state, offered the same advantages that had made it attractive during his previous period as a fugitive: local connections, familiar territory, and multiple escape routes including access to the coast. On January 8, 2016, Mexican Marines launched a pre-dawn raid on a house in Los Mochis where intelligence indicated Guzman was staying. The operation was planned and executed with the lessons learned from previous near-misses firmly in mind. Multiple locations were targeted simultaneously to prevent escape, and overwhelming force was used to minimize the possibility of armed resistance. The raid began at approximately 4:30 a.m. when Marines surrounded the targeted house. Unlike his peaceful surrender in Mazatlan 2 years earlier, this operation met with significant resistance. Guzman's bodyguards engaged in a fierce firefight with the Marines, resulting in several casualties among the defenders and highlighting the increasingly dangerous nature of operations against high-level cartel targets. During the initial phase of the raid, Guzman managed to escape from the house through a sophisticated tunnel system that connected to the city's storm drain network. This escape route demonstrated that even while living as a fugitive, he had maintained access to advanced engineering capabilities and had prepared multiple contingency plans for evading capture. However, the escape was only temporary. Marine units, anticipating the possibility of tunnel-based escape routes, had positioned personnel to monitor the storm drain system. When Guzman and his associate emerged from the drainage system several blocks away, they were immediately spotted and pursued by law enforcement personnel. The final capture occurred when Guzman and his companion attempted to steal a vehicle to continue their escape. Mexican Marines apprehended both men without further violence, finally ending one of the most intensive manhunts in modern criminal history. For the third time, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman found himself in custody, but this time the circumstances of his capture would lead to a very different outcome. The recapture of El Chapo in January 2016 immediately triggered an intense legal and diplomatic battle over his future. The United States had been seeking his extradition for years, arguing that American courts were the appropriate venue for prosecuting crimes that had caused enormous damage to American communities. The Mexican government, still embarrassed by Guzman's 2 previous escapes, faced pressure both to demonstrate that it could successfully prosecute such cases and to avoid the appearance of surrendering sovereignty to American demands. The legal framework for extradition between Mexico and the United States was complex and had been the subject of ongoing negotiations for decades. Mexican law included provisions designed to protect Mexican nationals from what were perceived as potentially unfair prosecutions in foreign courts. These provisions had traditionally been used to resist American extradition requests, particularly in cases involving Mexican citizens accused of crimes related to the drug trade. Guzman's legal team immediately began challenging the extradition request through every available avenue in the Mexican court system. Their strategy was to delay the process as long as possible while simultaneously arguing that their client should be prosecuted in Mexico rather than being surrendered to American authorities. They filed multiple appeals, challenged procedural aspects of the extradition process, and argued that Guzman would not receive fair treatment in the American justice system. The Mexican government's position was complicated by several factors. On one hand, there was legitimate concern about maintaining national sovereignty and ensuring that Mexican citizens received appropriate legal protections. On the other hand, the embarrassment caused by Guzman's previous escapes made it difficult to argue convincingly that Mexican prisons could hold him securely or that Mexican courts could conduct effective prosecutions. American pressure for extradition was intense and persistent. U.S. officials argued that Guzman's crimes had caused immeasurable damage to American communities and that justice could only be served through prosecution in American courts. They also pointed to the sophisticated nature of the tunnel escape as evidence that Mexican security measures, no matter how carefully designed, could not guarantee that Guzman would remain in custody if prosecuted in Mexico. After a lengthy legal battle, Mexican authorities ultimately approved Guzman's extradition to the United States. On January 19, 2017, exactly 16 years after his first escape from Puente Grande, Joaquin Guzman was transferred to American custody and flown to New York to face prosecution in federal court. The extradition was conducted with extraordinary security measures, reflecting both the value of the prisoner and the lessons learned from his previous escapes. Guzman was transported in a heavily guarded convoy from Altiplano prison to Mexico City's International Airport, where a specially equipped aircraft waited to transport him to the United States. The flight path and timing were kept secret until after his arrival in New York. Upon arrival at Long Island MacArthur Airport, Guzman was immediately transferred to the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in Lower Manhattan. This federal facility, located just blocks from the courthouse where he would eventually be tried, was chosen specifically for its proximity to the court and its reputation as one of America's most secure detention facilities. The security measures implemented for Guzman's detention at MCC were unprecedented. He was held in solitary confinement in a specially modified cell designed to prevent any possibility of escape or communication with outside criminal associates. The modifications included additional electronic monitoring, reinforced walls and floors, and 24-hour surveillance by specially trained guards. Communication with the outside world was strictly limited and monitored. All phone calls were recorded and analyzed, all mail was inspected, and visits were restricted to immediate family members and legal counsel under heavily supervised conditions. These measures were designed not only to prevent escape attempts but also to ensure that Guzman could not continue directing cartel operations from his cell. The conditions of his detention sparked some controversy, with defense attorneys arguing that the isolation and restrictions violated constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment. However, federal judges consistently ruled that the security measures were justified given Guzman's history of escape and the ongoing threat posed by his criminal organization. The trial of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman began on November 5, 2018, in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York in Brooklyn. The courthouse was transformed into a fortress, with unprecedented security measures that reflected both the high-profile nature of the case and concerns about potential threats from cartel associates seeking to disrupt the proceedings. The prosecution team, led by federal prosecutors from the Eastern District of New York, had spent years preparing what they described as one of the most complex and significant drug trafficking cases in American history. The charges against Guzman were sweeping and included conspiracy to distribute cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana, money laundering, and the use of firearms in connection with drug trafficking crimes. If convicted on all counts, he faced the possibility of life imprisonment without parole. The case presented by prosecutors painted a picture of Guzman as the leader of a vast criminal enterprise that had caused immeasurable damage to American communities over decades. They alleged that under his leadership, the Sinaloa cartel had smuggled more than 440,000 pounds of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana into the United States, generating billions of dollars in illegal profits. The evidence presented during the trial was staggering in its scope and detail. Prosecutors called more than 50 witnesses, many of whom were former cartel associates who had agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for reduced sentences. These witnesses provided first-hand accounts of Guzman's role in directing cartel operations, ordering violence against rivals and perceived traitors, and implementing sophisticated smuggling strategies. One of the most dramatic aspects of the trial was the detailed testimony about Guzman's escape from Altiplano prison. Witnesses described the elaborate planning and construction of the tunnel, providing insights into the sophisticated capabilities of the Sinaloa cartel and the extensive corruption that enabled such operations. The testimony included details about the engineering challenges overcome during construction and the precise coordination required to ensure the tunnel emerged exactly at Guzman's cell. The prosecution's case relied heavily on testimony from former cartel associates who had been arrested and agreed to cooperate with American authorities. These witnesses, many of whom had worked closely with Guzman for years or even decades, provided unprecedented insights into the inner workings of one of the world's most powerful criminal organizations. Perhaps the most significant cooperating witness was Jesus El Rey Zambada, brother of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, who served as Guzman's partner in leading the Sinaloa cartel. Jesus Zambada had been arrested in 2008 and had spent years providing information to American investigators about cartel operations. His testimony covered decades of criminal activity and provided detailed accounts of Guzman's role in major trafficking operations. Another crucial witness was Damaso López Núñez, known as El Licenciado, the graduate, who had served as a high-ranking Mexican government official before becoming one of Guzman's most trusted associates. López Núñez had intimate knowledge of the corruption networks that enabled cartel operations and could provide first-hand accounts of how government officials were recruited, compromised, and used to protect criminal activities. The testimony of these witnesses was both compelling and disturbing. They described a criminal empire that operated with military-like discipline and employed extreme violence to maintain control and eliminate threats. Witnesses recounted specific incidents where Guzman had ordered the murder of rivals, former associates who were suspected of betrayal, and law enforcement officials who could not be corrupted. One particularly shocking aspect of the testimony concerned Guzman's personal involvement in acts of violence. While he was often portrayed in media accounts as a businessman criminal who delegated violent activities to subordinates, witnesses testified that he personally participated in torture and murder. These accounts challenged romanticized portrayals of Guzman and revealed the brutal reality of cartel leadership. The witnesses also provided detailed information about the cartel's smuggling operations, describing sophisticated tunnels, submarines, aircraft, and other methods used to transport drugs across international borders. They explained how the organization had evolved from a relatively simple trafficking network into a complex multinational corporation with operations spanning multiple continents. Guzman's defense team, led by experienced criminal defense attorneys, faced the enormous challenge of defending a client whose alleged crimes had been documented in extraordinary detail by dozens of cooperating witnesses. Their strategy focused on attacking the credibility of these witnesses and challenging the government's portrayal of Guzman as the ultimate leader of the Sinaloa cartel. The defense argued that the cooperating witnesses were unreliable because they had strong incentives to fabricate or exaggerate their testimony in order to receive reduced sentences from American prosecutors. They pointed out that many of these witnesses had committed serious crimes themselves and had only agreed to testify after being arrested and facing the possibility of lengthy prison sentences. Defense attorneys also attempted to shift responsibility away from Guzman by arguing that he was not the sole or even primary leader of the Sinaloa cartel. They suggested that Ismael El Mayo Zambada, who remained at large, was actually the more powerful figure within the organization and that Guzman had been unfairly scapegoated because he was easier to capture and prosecute. The defense team challenged specific aspects of the prosecution's evidence, questioning the chain of custody for physical evidence, the reliability of intercepted communications, and the accuracy of financial records allegedly documenting cartel profits. They argued that the government's case was built on speculation and the testimony of criminals who could not be trusted. Perhaps most significantly, the defense attempted to humanize Guzman by presenting evidence about his impoverished childhood and limited education. They argued that he had been born into circumstances that provided few legitimate opportunities for advancement and had been shaped by a culture of violence and criminality that was endemic to certain regions of Mexico. However, the defense strategy faced significant challenges. The volume of evidence against Guzman was overwhelming, and the consistency of testimony from multiple independent witnesses made it difficult to dismiss their accounts as fabrication. The defense was also limited in their ability to present alternative theories of the case without putting Guzman himself on the witness stand, which would have exposed him to potentially damaging cross-examination. After deliberating for 6 days, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all 10 counts against Joaquin Guzman. The verdict was announced on February 12, 2019, marking the end of one of the most significant drug trafficking trials in American legal history. The convictions carried mandatory sentences that would ensure Guzman would spend the rest of his life in American prison. The guilty verdicts covered the full range of charges brought by prosecutors: engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise, the kingpin charge, conspiracy to launder narcotics proceeds, international distribution of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine and marijuana, and use of firearms in furtherance of drug trafficking. Each conviction carried substantial prison sentences, but the continuing criminal enterprise charge alone carried a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Judge Brian Cogan, who presided over the trial, scheduled sentencing for July 17, 2019. During the months between conviction and sentencing, Guzman remained in solitary confinement at the Metropolitan Correctional Center under the same stringent security conditions that had been in place throughout the trial. The sentencing hearing provided an opportunity for victims of Guzman's crimes to address the court and for the defense to present mitigating factors that might influence the judge's decision within the limited discretion available under federal sentencing guidelines. Prosecutors presented evidence about the devastating impact of the Sinaloa cartel's activities on American communities, including statistics on overdose deaths, addiction rates, and violence associated with drug trafficking. Defense attorneys presented character evidence from family members and argued for consideration of Guzman's difficult childhood and the cultural factors that had influenced his life choices. However, these arguments had limited impact given the mandatory nature of most of the sentences and the overwhelming evidence of the scale and brutality of his criminal activities. On July 17, 2019, Judge Cogan sentenced Joaquin Guzman to life imprisonment plus 30 years, along with forfeiture of $12.6 billion in assets traced to his criminal activities. The judge described Guzman's crimes as overwhelming in their evil, and noted that the evidence presented during trial had demonstrated a pattern of violence and corruption that had caused immeasurable harm to both Mexico and the United States. Following his sentencing, Guzman was transferred to ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison in Colorado known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. This facility, officially designated the United States Penitentiary, Administrative Maximum Facility, USP Florence ADMAX, houses the most dangerous and high-risk federal prisoners in the American corrections system. ADX Florence was specifically designed to hold prisoners who pose exceptional security risks and cannot be safely housed in conventional maximum security prisons. The facility's inmates include terrorists, spies, organized crime leaders, and others whose criminal activities or escape potential require the highest levels of security available in the federal prison system. Guzman's cell at ADX Florence measures approximately 7 by 12 feet and contains basic amenities including a concrete bed, desk, stool, and combination toilet sink. The cell has a small window that provides limited natural light but no view of the surrounding landscape. These conditions represent a dramatic change from the luxury accommodations he had enjoyed during his first imprisonment in Mexico or even the relative comfort of his early years as a free criminal leader. The security measures at ADX Florence are designed to make escape virtually impossible. The facility features multiple perimeters of razor wire, motion detectors, attack dogs, and armed guards in towers. All prisoner movements are strictly controlled and monitored, with inmates spending 22 to 23 hours per day in their cells. The 1 hour of daily recreation time is conducted in a small outdoor cage that provides fresh air but maintains complete security. Communication with the outside world is severely restricted at ADX Florence. All mail is inspected, phone calls are monitored and limited, and visits are conducted through glass barriers with intercom systems. These measures are designed to prevent inmates from continuing to direct criminal activities from prison or from coordinating escape attempts with outside associates. For Guzman, who had spent much of his adult life surrounded by luxury and wielding enormous power, the conditions at ADX Florence represent a complete reversal of fortune. The man who once commanded a criminal empire worth billions of dollars now lives in isolation with minimal human contact and no prospect of ever regaining his freedom. The capture, trial, and imprisonment of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman marked the end of one of the most remarkable criminal careers in modern history, but his story continues to reverberate through law enforcement, popular culture, and the ongoing struggle against organized crime. His legacy is complex and multifaceted, encompassing both the devastation caused by his criminal activities and the grudging admiration for his ability to repeatedly outwit sophisticated law enforcement efforts. From a law enforcement perspective, the Guzman case represented both a significant victory and a sobering reminder of the challenges posed by modern organized crime. His successful prosecution demonstrated that even the most powerful criminal leaders could be brought to justice through sustained international cooperation and sophisticated investigative techniques. However, his two dramatic escapes from Mexican prisons highlighted the vulnerabilities in correctional systems and the corrupting influence of vast criminal wealth. The impact of Guzman's criminal activities extended far beyond the immediate profits generated by drug trafficking. His organization was responsible for countless deaths on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border, contributing to violence that destabilized entire regions of Mexico and fueled addiction epidemics in American communities. The social costs of his activities, measured in lives lost, families destroyed, and communities terrorized, represent perhaps the most significant aspect of his legacy. Despite his imprisonment, the Sinaloa cartel continued to operate under new leadership, demonstrating the resilience of criminal organizations and the limited impact that removing individual leaders can have on broader patterns of illegal activity. This reality highlighted the need for comprehensive approaches to combating organized crime that addressed not only individual criminals but also the underlying social, economic, and political factors that enable criminal organizations to flourish. The Guzman story also became a cultural phenomenon, inspiring countless books, documentaries, television series, and films. This popular fascination with his life reflected broader cultural attitudes toward crime, punishment, and the complex relationship between law enforcement and organized crime. However, the romanticization of his story in some media portrayals raised concerns about the potential for glorifying criminal activity and minimizing the real harm caused by drug trafficking. The extraordinary story of Joaquín El Chapo Guzman offers important insights into the nature of modern organized crime, the challenges facing law enforcement agencies, and the complex factors that enable individuals to build and maintain vast criminal enterprises. His rise from poverty in rural Sinaloa to leadership of one of the world's most powerful drug trafficking organizations demonstrates both the opportunities created by illegal markets and the devastating personal and social costs of criminal success. Perhaps most significantly, Guzman's story illustrates the crucial role of corruption in enabling organized crime. His ability to escape from supposedly secure prisons, evade capture for extended periods, and continue directing criminal operations while in prison depended largely on his capacity to corrupt government officials, law enforcement personnel, and correctional staff. This corruption represented not just individual moral failures but systemic weaknesses that undermined the rule of law and enabled criminal organizations to operate with impunity. The international cooperation required to ultimately capture and prosecute Guzman demonstrates the importance of coordinated responses to transnational crime. His case required the combined efforts of Mexican and American law enforcement agencies, intelligence services, and judicial systems working together over many years. This cooperation was not always smooth or easy, reflecting the political sensitivities and sovereignty concerns that can complicate international criminal justice efforts. The technological aspects of both Guzman's criminal operations and his eventual capture highlight the rapidly evolving nature of the contest between criminals and law enforcement. His organization's sophisticated tunnels, communication systems, and logistics networks demonstrated remarkable innovation and technical capability. However, advances in surveillance technology, intelligence analysis, and international information sharing ultimately provided law enforcement with the tools necessary to track and capture him. The story also raises important questions about the effectiveness of current approaches to combating drug trafficking and organized crime. Despite the enormous resources devoted to capturing Guzman and dismantling his organization, the illegal drug trade continues to flourish under new leadership and through different networks. This reality suggests that while individual prosecutions are important for delivering justice and deterring criminal activity, they must be combined with broader strategies addressing the demand for illegal drugs, the social conditions that make criminal organizations attractive to potential recruits, and the governance failures that enable corruption to flourish. Finally, the Guzman case serves as a reminder of the human costs of the drug trade, both for those directly involved in criminal activities and for the countless victims of drug-related violence and addiction. Behind the dramatic escapes, sophisticated operations, and international manhunts lies a trail of destruction that affected millions of lives across multiple countries. While his story may continue to fascinate observers, it is essential to remember that the real legacy of El Chapo is not the audacity of his escapes or the scope of his criminal empire, but the immense harm caused by his activities and the importance of continued efforts to combat the organized crime networks that continue to threaten communities around the world. The capture and conviction of Joaquin Guzman represented the end of a remarkable criminal career, but the broader struggle against organized crime continues. His story serves as both a testament to the eventual reach of justice and a warning about the ongoing challenges posed by sophisticated criminal organizations in an increasingly interconnected world. The lessons learned from his rise and fall will continue to inform law enforcement strategies and criminal justice policies for years to come, contributing to ongoing efforts to protect communities from the devastating effects of organized crime and drug trafficking.